In gatherings around America, Christian evangelicals meet to worship. Many are known as Christian Zionists, who interpret the Bible in a unique way.
Christian Zionism, or as it's also called, dispensationalism, believes that the Jewish people from throughout the world must all return to the Holy Land. And the state of Israel must conquer all of the land between the Nile River in Egypt and the Euphrates River in Iraq. They must blow up the mosques on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And for 3.5 years, after they have rebuilt their temple and reestablished the Levitical practices of animal sacrifice, for 3.5 years they will worship the Antichrist. Jesus Christ will return and lead an army of hundreds of thousands and kill off all of the Jews with the exception of 144,000 who will promptly convert to Christianity. A second element is the belief in the imminence of tribulation, part of an end-time scenario in which the human race itself will be destroyed in a holocaust, inevitably involving nuclear war. The third element in Christian Zionism is the notion of the rapture, the idea that before tribulation is in full swing, Jesus will return, not for the final time, but for a second time. He returns 3 times, according to the doctrine of the rapture. And he will lift from the earth all of the born-again true Christians. The living and the dead who are born again will be whisked up to heaven, where they can watch the destruction of the earth from bleachers in the sky.
Well, there are always elements of this end-time Armageddon idea on the fringes of Christianity. You can look at it, even in New Testament times, there is a takeoff from the apocalyptic texts and the theology, which was popular in Jesus' time. But it never was central, and Jesus, we know, downplayed it, as did Paul and others. But it remained an element of people wanting to know how the last days are going to be resolved. Often it would pop up at a millennial year. So you can go back in church history. I've done a little bit of this. In the year 900, in the year 1000, there was a lot of emphasis on the return of Jesus in the end times. In the year 1800, it was a very popular year because there was a lot going on in the world. The American Revolution, the French Revolution had just taken place. Europeans were upset And so there's a lot of focus on the turn of the century in 1800. And shortly after that, a lot of writing and theology developed around the idea of the end and predictive prophecy. And one fellow who caught it a little bit later is this John Nelson Darby, who broke away from the Anglican Church. And he was in a Bible study meeting, and a woman was caught up with the Spirit, and she began to speak about the books of Daniel and Revelation as prophesying the end and claiming, I've had a word from the Lord that we are in the last days and Jesus is about to return. This had a huge impact on a few people who were in that room who saw her as a prophet. And they began to form some prophecy conferences. A former parliamentarian was there and sponsored them at his estate. Darby got involved in this, John Nelson Darby, this breakaway Anglican, and he began to do Bible study, and he systematized that movement in a series of writings. And he was very bright. He was a Greek scholar. He knew the New Testament and studied it in Greek. He knew Hebrew. But what he did was he actually tried to create a logical connection between what he saw as Jesus taking people literally into the clouds from 1 Thessalonians 4, so he invented the doctrine of the rapture. Some claim he got it from others, but what we know, he invented that. In the post-Civil War era, the Second Great Awakening, many evangelicals were converted to this teaching by Darby, who made 6 missionary journeys and became very popular in those Bible and Prophecy conference movements after the Civil War era.
John Nelson Darby in the 1830s was an Irishman who had an epiphany that he alone could decipher the meaning of the Bible. He was a literalist and he was a cherry picker, and he was able to create this hair-raising horror story involving tribulation and the punishment of mankind and Jesus as a warrior as a result of his epiphany. And he believed, as did all of the dispensationalists after him, that he alone understood the Bible, and that every other human being and all of the Christians were not only in error in terms of their understanding of the Bible, but they were also under the influence of satanic forces. So what is meant by the term dispensationalism? The essence of dispensationalism, as one might expect coming from gentlemen who hated the rest of the world and were self-appointed guardians of the truth, the basis of dispensationalism is the notion of original sin. And a dispensation is one of a series of 7 events with the same pattern, namely that God dictated to the Jewish people a certain course of action, knowing that they would violate and fail so that he could punish them. Most of these exist in Genesis. They should be familiar with everyone. Eve eating the forbidden fruit, the Jewish people and mankind being wiped out through Noah's flood, the various exiles of the Jewish people because of their sinfulness. Finally, and most important, was the rejection by the Jews of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. In each case, the Jewish people were given an assignment or a dispensation. They violated it, and they were punished. The 7th dispensation, and the final one, requires the Jews to return to Israel